In the shadowed corridors of power, where ambition meets treachery and kindness is often mistaken for weakness, there exists a fundamental truth that separates the victorious from the vanquished. This truth, whispered in the courts of Renaissance princes and echoed through the halls of modern corporations, speaks to the very core of human survival. Not all souls deserve your assistance, and the greatest enemy you will ever face stares back at you from the mirror each morning. The young merchant Lorenzo discovered this harsh reality on a rain-soaked evening in Florence, when his generosity nearly cost him everything he had worked to build. Having extended his hand to help a struggling competitor, he found that same hand reaching into his coffers, stealing not just his gold but his reputation and clientele. As he stood in his emptied warehouse watching the last of his trusted workers walk away with his former rival, Lorenzo understood what the great political philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli had written centuries before. Men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that he who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. This document serves as both warning and wisdom, a comprehensive examination of the 6 archetypes of individuals who will consume your energy, resources, and strength while giving nothing meaningful in return. More importantly, it explores the profound transformation that occurs when a person chooses to destroy their weak, accommodating self and emerge as someone who cannot be destroyed by others. This is not a call to cruelty or callousness, but rather an invitation to strategic wisdom and self-preservation. The marketplace of human interaction operates under laws as immutable as those governing commerce or warfare. Those who understand these laws prosper. Those who ignore them perish. In examining these principles through both historical insight and contemporary application, we begin to see that helping others is not inherently virtuous when it leads to our own destruction, and that the strongest among us are often those who have learned to say no with the same conviction they once said yes. The architecture of exploitation. Before we can identify those who would drain our resources, we must first understand the mechanisms by which exploitation operates. Human nature, in its rawest form, gravitates toward the path of least resistance. When individuals discover someone willing to provide assistance without reciprocation or boundaries, they naturally begin to view that person as a resource rather than a relationship. This transformation happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, until the helper finds themselves trapped in a cycle of giving that yields diminishing returns. Consider the case of Maria, a brilliant software engineer who prided herself on being the person others could rely upon. When her colleague David approached her for help with a critical project, she gladly shared her expertise and time. The project's success led to David's promotion, while Maria remained in her position, now burdened with additional responsibilities as David continued to seek her assistance for his new role. Month by month, Maria found herself working longer hours, solving David's problems, and receiving none of the recognition or advancement she deserved. She had become what Machiavelli would recognize as a victim of her own virtue. This pattern repeats itself across every sphere of human interaction because it exploits a fundamental flaw in how we perceive reciprocity. We assume that good deeds create obligation, that assistance builds loyalty, and that generosity generates gratitude. In reality, these assumptions often prove false when applied to certain personality types who view kindness not as a gift to be treasured, but as a weakness to be exploited. The 6 archetypes of destruction, the professional victims. The first category of individuals you must learn to avoid helping encompasses those who have made victimhood their identity, transforming every setback into evidence of the world's cruelty and their own powerlessness. These individuals, whom we shall call the professional victims, possess an almost supernatural ability to find problems in every solution and obstacles in every opportunity. Marcus, a talented architect, encountered such an individual when he hired James as a junior designer. Despite Marcus's patient mentoring and numerous opportunities for growth, James consistently attributed his failures to external circumstances. When a design was rejected, it was because the client lacked vision. When deadlines were missed, it was because the timeline was unreasonable. When colleagues avoided working with him, it was because they were jealous of his potential. Marcus spent countless hours listening to James's complaints, offering advice, creating opportunities, and providing emotional support, only to watch James sabotage each chance for improvement. The professional victim operates under a specific psychological framework that makes them fundamentally incompatible with genuine assistance. They have constructed an identity around their struggles, and solving their problems would require them to abandon the very foundation of how they see themselves. Consequently, they unconsciously resist any real change while simultaneously demanding constant attention and support. These individuals exhibit several characteristic behaviors that make them immediately recognizable to those who know what to observe. They speak exclusively in the language of complaint, never acknowledging their role and their difficulties. They possess an encyclopedic knowledge of everyone who has wronged them but remain curiously ignorant of their own contributions to conflicts. Most tellingly, they respond to solutions with new problems and to opportunities with excuses. The energy drain created by professional victims is particularly insidious because it masquerades as compassion. They appeal to our natural desire to help those in distress, but their distress is performative rather than genuine. They seek not resolution but validation, not change but attention, not growth but sympathy. Every hour spent trying to help them is an hour stolen from those who would genuinely benefit from assistance and reciprocate with gratitude and growth. The insatiable takers. The second archetype demanding our attention consists of those individuals who view every relationship as a transaction in which they are perpetually owed more than they give. These insatiable takers possess an almost pathological inability to recognize reciprocity, instead operating under the assumption that others exist primarily to serve their needs and ambitions. Sarah, a successful marketing executive, learned this lesson painfully through her relationship with her sister Linda. Throughout their adult lives, Sarah had provided financial support during Linda's numerous career changes, offered networking connections for Linda's various business ventures, and even co-signed loans that Linda ultimately defaulted upon. Despite these sacrifices, Linda's response to each act of generosity was not gratitude but expectation. When Sarah finally achieved her dream of purchasing a vacation home, Linda's first comment was not congratulation but complaint that Sarah hadn't consulted her about which property to buy, since Linda had assumed she would have unlimited access to it. The insatiable taker operates from a worldview that positions them at the center of everyone else's universe. They genuinely believe that their needs, wants, and problems take precedence over those of others, not through malicious intent but through a profound inability to perceive others as fully autonomous individuals, with their own goals and limitations. This psychological blindness makes them exceptionally dangerous to those with generous natures, as they will consume resources and energy without ever reaching a point of satisfaction or reciprocation. These individuals can be identified by their characteristic pattern of escalating demands. Initial requests are often reasonable and accompanied by promises of future reciprocation. However, once assistance is provided, the requests grow larger and more frequent, while the promised reciprocation never materializes. Instead, they develop an elaborate justification system that explains why their continued need for help is actually evidence of how deserving they are of additional support. The manipulative charmers, perhaps the most dangerous category, consists of those who have weaponized charm and charisma to mask their exploitative intentions. These manipulative charmers possess an intuitive understanding of human psychology that they employ not to build genuine connections but to extract maximum value from every interaction. They represent the most sophisticated form of exploitation, one that leaves victims questioning their own perceptions and judgment. Robert, a venture capitalist with decades of experience, fell victim to such an individual when he met Alexandra at an industry conference. Brilliant, articulate, and possessed of an almost magnetic personality, Alexandra presented herself as an entrepreneur with a revolutionary business concept. Over months of carefully orchestrated encounters, she drew Robert into her orbit through a combination of flattery, intellectual stimulation, and carefully timed vulnerability. She spoke of her respect for his expertise, sought his advice on complex problems, and gradually revealed personal struggles that made Robert feel both protective and special for being trusted with such confidences. Only after Robert had invested significant money, and even more significant social capital, did he begin to notice the pattern. Alexandra's business model was always 6 months away from profitability. Her financial difficulties always required immediate attention but temporary solutions. Her gratitude was effusive but never translated into the independence she promised to achieve. Most disturbingly, Robert discovered that he was not unique in his experience with Alexandra, but rather one of several successful individuals who had been drawn into similar arrangements through nearly identical approaches. The manipulative charmer operates through a sophisticated understanding of human needs and desires, particularly the need to feel important, valued, and special. They excel at identifying what each individual wants to hear and providing it in carefully measured doses. Unlike cruder forms of exploitation, their approach is subtle and psychological, making victims complicit in their own manipulation. by appealing to their ego and emotions rather than their fears or guilt. The perpetually entitled, the fourth category, encompasses those individuals who operate from a fundamental belief that the world owes them success, happiness, and support regardless of their efforts or contributions. These perpetually entitled individuals represent a unique form of psychological parasitism, one that transforms every interaction into an opportunity to collect what they believe is rightfully theirs. Michael discovered this truth through his relationship with his business partner Kevin, whom he had known since college. When they decided to launch a consulting firm together, Michael assumed their friendship and shared history would translate into equal effort and commitment. Instead, he found himself carrying an increasingly disproportionate share of the workload, while Kevin focused on the aspects of the business he found enjoyable, leaving the difficult and tedious tasks for Michael to handle. When clients complained about missed deadlines or sloppy work, Kevin's response was not increased effort but increased indignation that clients were being unreasonable. When the business faced financial difficulties, Kevin's solution was not to reduce his own compensation but to suggest that Michael should work longer hours to increase revenue. When Michael finally confronted him about the imbalance, Kevin's reaction was not shame or recognition but anger, that Michael was failing to appreciate Kevin's strategic contributions to the partnership. The chronic boundary violators. The fifth archetype consists of individuals who seem constitutionally incapable of respecting others' time, energy, space, or resources. These chronic boundary violators operate under the assumption that their needs supersede any limits others might attempt to establish, and they possess an almost supernatural ability to find ways around or through any boundary that stands between them and what they want. Jennifer, a therapist in private practice, encountered such an individual when she agreed to see Thomas as a client. What began as standard therapeutic appointments quickly escalated into a consuming relationship that extended far beyond professional boundaries. Thomas would call between sessions with emergencies that required immediate attention. He would extend appointments beyond their scheduled time by introducing new crises just as sessions were ending. He would contact Jennifer on weekends and holidays, always with situations that seemed to require her immediate intervention. When Jennifer attempted to establish clearer boundaries, Thomas's response was not compliance but escalation. He would agree to the boundaries during sessions, but ignore them in practice. He would acknowledge the appropriateness of her limits while simultaneously explaining why his situation was unique and therefore exempt from such restrictions. Most manipulatively, he would frame his boundary violations as evidence of his trust in their therapeutic relationship, making Jennifer feel guilty for wanting to maintain professional standards. The ungrateful scorpions. The final and perhaps most destructive category consists of those individuals who respond to kindness with betrayal, assistance with sabotage, and generosity with hostility. These ungrateful scorpions represent the darkest aspect of human nature, possessing an almost pathological need to destroy those who help them, driven by psychological mechanisms that transform gratitude into resentment and aid into ammunition. David learned this lesson through his relationship with his protege Mark, a talented but struggling artist whom David discovered working in a coffee shop. Recognizing Mark's potential, David offered him studio space, introduced him to collectors and gallery owners, and even purchased several of his early works to help establish his career. Under David's mentorship, Mark's reputation grew. His work began selling consistently, and his future looked bright. However, as Mark's success increased, so did his resentment toward David. He began to reinterpret David's assistance as attempts at control. He viewed David's introductions as evidence that David was taking credit for his success. He saw David's early purchases as manipulative attempts to artificially inflate his market value. Eventually, Mark launched a public campaign to distance himself from David, claiming that David had exploited him and taken advantage of his vulnerability as a struggling artist. The transformation, destroying the weak self. Having examined the 6 categories of individuals who will drain your resources and energy while providing nothing meaningful in return, we must now turn our attention to the more profound challenge, transforming ourselves from potential victims into individuals who cannot be exploited or destroyed by others. This transformation requires nothing less than the complete dismantling of our weak, accommodating self and the construction of something stronger, wiser, and more strategic in its place. The weak self that must be destroyed is not weak in terms of kindness, compassion, or generosity, but weak in terms of boundaries, discernment, and self-protection. It is the part of us that says yes when we should say no, that gives when we should withhold, that accommodates when we should resist. This weakness masquerades as virtue, but ultimately serves neither ourselves nor those we attempt to help. Antonio discovered this truth during his tenure as the head of a non-profit organization dedicated to helping struggling entrepreneurs. For years, he prided himself on his open-door policy, his willingness to help anyone who requested assistance, and his reputation as someone who never turned away a person in need. However, he gradually noticed that his most successful clients were those who required the least help, while those who consumed the most resources showed the least progress. The process of destroying the weak self begins with brutal honesty about our motivations for helping others. Are we truly seeking to benefit them, or are we seeking to benefit ourselves through the validation, gratitude, and sense of importance that helping provides? Are we responding to genuine need and potential for growth, or are we responding to manipulation, guilt, and social pressure? The architecture of unshakable strength. The transformation from vulnerable helper to strategic ally requires constructing what we might call an architecture of unshakable strength, a comprehensive system of principles, practices, and perspectives that make exploitation not just difficult but essentially impossible. This architecture consists of several interconnected elements that reinforce each other to create a foundation that cannot be undermined by even the most sophisticated manipulators. The cornerstone of this architecture is abundance mentality combined with strategic scarcity. This means understanding that while our resources for helping others are limited, our potential for creating value and building meaningful relationships is essentially unlimited when directed toward the right people in the right ways. It requires shifting from a mindset of unlimited availability to one of strategic deployment. Elena, a successful management consultant, implemented this principle by establishing what she called her investment criteria for helping others. Instead of responding to every request for assistance, she developed a systematic method for evaluating potential helping relationships based on the recipient's track record, commitment level, reciprocity potential, and alignment with her values and goals. The power of strategic withdrawal. One of the most crucial skills in building unshakable strength is learning when and how to withdraw from relationships and situations that no longer serve our interests or values. Strategic withdrawal is not about giving up or running away, but rather about redirecting our energy toward more productive opportunities and relationships. Carlos learned this lesson during his experience as a mentor in a small business development program. For 2 years, he worked closely with a group of aspiring entrepreneurs, providing advice, connections, and even financial support to help them launch their ventures. However, he gradually noticed that the most successful participants were those who required the least ongoing support, while those who consumed the most of his time and energy showed the least progress and seemed to resent his assistance. The emergence of authentic power. The destruction of our weak, accommodating self and the construction of strategic wisdom creates space for the emergence of what we might call authentic power. The ability to influence outcomes and relationships from a position of genuine strength rather than artificial accommodation. This power differs fundamentally from the power that comes from position, wealth, or authority because it stems from internal alignment between our values, decisions, and actions. Authentic power manifests in several distinct ways that make exploitation virtually impossible, while enhancing our ability to create meaningful value for others. The first manifestation is gravitational influence, the ability to attract high-quality people and opportunities without actively seeking them. The philosophy of strategic compassion. The transformation from indiscriminate helper to strategic ally requires developing what we might call strategic compassion, a sophisticated approach to helping others that maximizes positive impact while minimizing the risk of exploitation or enabling. This philosophy recognizes that true compassion sometimes requires saying no, that genuine kindness sometimes involves allowing others to struggle, and that real wisdom sometimes demands withdrawal rather than engagement. Strategic compassion operates from several core principles that distinguish it from both callous self-interest and naive accommodation. The first principle is effectiveness over intention, the recognition that good intentions don't justify ineffective or counterproductive actions. The second principle is growth over comfort, the understanding that the most valuable help we can provide often involves creating conditions that promote development rather than removing obstacles. The integration of wisdom and strength. The ultimate goal of this transformation is not to become hard, cynical, or selfish, but rather to integrate wisdom and strength in ways that enhance both our effectiveness and our humanity. This integration creates what ancient philosophers called practical wisdom, the ability to act virtuously in complex situations that require balancing competing values and interests. The person who successfully destroys their weak, accommodating self and constructs strategic strength in its place becomes someone who can help others more effectively while remaining essentially invulnerable to exploitation. They develop the discernment to distinguish between those who can benefit from assistance and those who will consume resources without growth. They cultivate the strength to maintain boundaries regardless of pressure or manipulation. The journey from vulnerable helper to strategic ally is ultimately a journey toward authentic power, the kind of strength that comes from internal alignment rather than external position. This power cannot be taken away by others because it doesn't depend on others for its existence. It cannot be destroyed through betrayal because it doesn't require trust to function. It cannot be undermined through manipulation because it operates from principles rather than emotions. Those who complete this transformation discover that they can help others more effectively while enjoying greater personal satisfaction and security. They attract higher quality relationships and opportunities while repelling those who would exploit or drain them. They develop the capacity to create lasting positive impact while maintaining the energy and resources needed for continued growth and contribution. The man or woman who destroys their weak self truly cannot be destroyed by others, not because they become invulnerable to all harm, but because they build their foundation on principles and practices that cannot be shaken by external circumstances or malicious actions. They become like the ancient oak tree that bends with the storm but cannot be uprooted because its root system runs deep and its structure has been strengthened through seasons of challenge and growth. In a world filled with those who would consume our energy, exploit our kindness, and drain our resources while giving nothing meaningful in return, this transformation represents not just personal protection but a form of service to humanity. By refusing to enable dysfunction, we create space for health. By declining to support exploitation, we make resources available for genuine need. By destroying our weak, accommodating selves, we become capable of helping others build strength rather than dependence. The transformation is complete not when we no longer care about others, but when we care so deeply that we refuse to help in ways that hurt. Not when we become invulnerable to all pain, but when our pain comes from wisdom rather than naivety. Not when we eliminate all risk from our lives, but when the risks we take serve purposes worthy of the cost they might exact. The person who emerges from this transformation cannot be destroyed by others because they have already destroyed everything in themselves that made such destruction possible. They have replaced weakness with strength, accommodation with discernment, and naive kindness with strategic compassion. They have become, in the truest sense, unshakable, not because nothing can touch them, but because what touches them cannot move them from their foundation of principled strength and practical wisdom.